So let's get started. Just a quick question, how many of you here understand English? I hope everyone. Okay, great, thank you. So accessibility. Accessibility is something that goes beyond coding, beyond development, beyond software engineering. It is something that is a core part of being a human. And as all of us here are developers, we develop in different languages, including Python. It's really important to understand how can we make our products more inclusive and more diverse. Just think of it this way, that today at the conference we had different food options available. We had vegetarian options, we had halal options, and we had other options just to cater to the needs of everyone present at the conference. Similarly, when we develop websites, it's really important to make sure that these websites are accessible to everyone and everyone has the ease of use. So how can we make sure that it is the case? So let's start with understanding what is accessibility. As I mentioned, accessibility means that your product or website is accessible to anyone who is coming and using the product. And web accessibility has a few problems in the websites that we see today. So as we all know that different people have different disabilities, people just associate accessibility with just disabilities, but it goes much beyond it. Think of people who do not have access to bigger screens. You are accessing a website on a phone, or you do not understand English, for example, and my website is in English. You will not understand it. So there are multiple barriers that come into place when people try to access our websites, and these are the few common problems. So first thing is screen reader compatibility. People who have visual impairments, even people with low vision or people who are colorblind, sometimes they are not able to understand or read the websites. Second thing is the keyboard navigation. People who have motor impairments, who let's say cannot easily use the mouse, they should be able to access your websites using keyboard shortcuts, right, or keyboard controls. Third thing is that when your background color and the text color are not too different, people who are colorblind or with low vision, they might not be able to distinguish the text, right? So that is one thing. Another thing is images not having an alternative text. So screen readers will not be able to read what was there, and people who are using those things will not be able to understand. And a lot of videos do not have captions. A lot of audios do not have transcriptions. That also acts as a hindrance to people who want to understand these content. So these are some of the common problems that we see in a lot of websites. So W3C says that there are 15% of the internet users worldwide who have some or the other disability. And they have given some guidelines which they recommend developers to use when they're building websites. So the website should be perceivable, which means you should be able to understand what are the different components. If it has images, they should have alt text, etc. It should be operable, which means even if I'm using keyboards, if I'm using some other tools to access my website, it is accessible. It should be understandable. It should have a clear and simple language. It should not have too many complex components which get messed up when you use some special devices like screen readers. And it should be robust. It should work with magnifiers. It should work on small devices. It should also work with devices which use speech to text maybe. So these are some recommendations that are given. So as a Python community, how can we help make websites more accessible? So today I'm going to talk briefly about automating this accessibility testing with Python. A lot of companies, when they build websites, they say that adding accessibility is expensive. It is a lot of cost, but it can be if in two scenarios. First, let's say you try to retrofit accessibility into an already complex website. So it will be obviously complex for you to rewrite the entire code and make sure that everything is working for everyone. The other scenario can be, let's say you start with it and then there are complex flows and you do not understand how to make it accessible. So in those cases, yes, it will be expensive and it will be hard. What I recommend is that when you start developing any website, from the day one, just start testing it in a way that it is accessible, and we can automate it with Python. So there are certain libraries. So the first one is Selenium. It is an open source tool which can be used to automate browser controls. So using it, it is also available in multiple languages, including Python. So It has a web driver using which you can control the instance of the browser. It also has web elements, for example, the buttons, the different form elements, etc. that you can access. And it also has locators to locate different elements by their IDs or their class name or different paths, right? So if you use this in correlation with PyTest for structuring accessibility tests, we can automate these tests, even add them to our CI/CD pipelines, and every time you are building your code, you can just make sure it is accessible. So for example, how can PyTest help us? It has fixtures, which means it has reusable pieces of components which build and end the test environments. It also has different parameters available. We can run it with different data sets, and it also has different markers. So basically, I'll show you a small example of how we can achieve some accessibility with Selenium and PyTest combined. So in this small example, I have initialized an instance of PyTest fixture, and what I'm doing is I'm initializing Selenium on my browser, which means it can do automatic things on my browser. For example, it can control the clicks, it can automatically fill forms for me, it can navigate across web pages. And for example, if you see in the test alt text method, I am getting the browser link and I'm checking all the image tags, and I'm checking that if each of those image tags has an alternate text available or not. If it won't be there, it will just simply tell me that okay, it's not having it, and I can go and manually fix those things. Similarly, if the heading structure is inappropriate, if it is not properly tagged, if it is not in a proper flow, I can test that. So this code is very simple, and it's just a representation of what I'm trying to portray. But the whole idea is that we can automate this accessibility testing and do it from day one, so that first of all, we don't have to do it manually, so you save devs time. Secondly, since it is consistently happening again and again, it is reliable. And thirdly, it is scalable. It is possible to do it multiple times, and it is also reliable. So that is one use case where Python can help make websites accessible. The second one is we can leverage Python libraries for accessibility research. We all know that data analysis is a growing domain, and Python is one of the biggest languages that is most commonly used there. So we have libraries like NumPy and Pandas, which we can use for accessibility data analysis. So we have a lot of websites. We can use even libraries like Beautiful Soap to scrape the websites, see what is the data looking like, run maybe these tests just like the one I showed you before, and see whether those websites are accessible. We can also do, for simple websites, we can automate. For more complex flows, we can have like smaller groups of people who have different disabilities, and we can bring them together and get them to test these data. And then we can train our models on this data and see what are the most common mistakes that developers make, or things that they overlook while they're developing websites, which is causing problems to marginalized groups. And we also have we can analyze user behavior. How are different users interacting with different elements in the website? Are they having trouble in some specific flows? Can we simplify them? And for example, processing and visualizing accessibility test results can also be an interesting thing. We can plot those data points into different graphs. And as I mentioned, we can scrape different websites and automate it. So these are just some ways in which we can be mindful of all the people who are utilizing our products and just make it more inclusive for everyone. So that was a small talk from my side. Thank you for helping me and all of us making the web more accessible to everyone. And I hope that after this session, all of us start looking at our products from a more wider understanding and more inclusivity. Thank you so much.